podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace.
Also, at some point.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right, so peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother Justice Rajee. Y'all just got some insight to like how the conversation be flowing from other stuff into this. And plus, I want to say this. So there that goes.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start off conversation today. The Reverend Jesse Jackson officially resigned or stepped down from leading the Rainbow Push Coalition. Mid-month. I guess that was at the weekend. I think it was the 17th at their annual convention.
Indeed.
And I think it's. I was in Chicago actually when that happened. And I guess we both were sort of in Chicago. That was happening. I think you were flying out sooner. And the overriding, he did show. I was at the Netroots conference for work, and he did show up. Did come through, make an appearance in one of the closing evening keynotes. And I think it's important in a lot of ways, like at a moment, to acknowledge Jesse's role and work, in sort of civil rights, political, awareness strategy. I think we have spoken on the impact, the external impact, I guess I'll say external. Maybe that's not the best word, but impact of him running for president twice, and in that the people who helped the campaign getting skills and access to the apparatus that allowed them to show up in future work as it pertained to electoral politics and or government roles. And also, really, I guess I think it would be accurate to say like pushing the Democratic Party to be more explicit about its, how Black issues are centered, in the platform. And before anybody that's listening wants to run up, if the Republican Party was in any way open to Jesse Jackson running as a Republican, I'm sure as hell he would have did it. But we all know that is not the case.
Well, I mean, that I guess we will get to that in a moment, right?
Right.
So, can I just touch on something real quick?
Yeah.
So, for the listeners, and I think it's important. Often I think about Ron Brown, and his role, and Ron Brown is for those who know the importance of him. One, as a child of Harlem, as a deputy at the National Urban League with Vernon Jordan. He then worked for Senator Kennedy. He supported Senator Kennedy when he ran for president, right, in 1980, which was a really important thing that presaged 84 with Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't support Jesse in 84, and then he came in the end of 84 and then supported him in 88.
Mm-hmm.
And amongst political circles, there's so much made of Ron Brown, as is deserved. Every bit of Ron Brown's trajectory. If you don't, the book Basic Brown is a story of his life. Anyone who has any interest in the political history of Black folks in the context of how Barack Obama ends up as president, how Hakeem Jeffries ends up as, minority leader. All the things we talk about tie back into Ron Brown in a certain sense. But it's important to remember that he only could do that because Jesse was Jesse. And for all of the stuff that people have challenges with Jesse, or whatever you think about what happened on the balcony, that ain't the place for this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you think happened in a lot of places, whatever you think happened with him in Harold Washington, that ain't the place for this conversation. What is important is that it is not debatable that Jesse Jackson's run in 1984 changed the trajectory of the Democratic Party from that point on. That is an absolute fact.
Mm-hmm.
And that is important because along with that inspired, or I should say maybe in line with that, inspired so many other things that we saw politically in this country. And so I just wanted to say that because I think sometimes even in elevating Ron Brown, we can downplay the fact that Jesse Jackson making the decision to do it and then essentially making Jesse a relevant party in 88 with Dukakis, then creates a space for Ron Brown to run Clinton's campaign, which then, just changes everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if Jesse doesn't push the envelope, you don't get Ron Brown being able to deliver more. And so, even in certain spaces where we're kind of like, activism is and advocacy is put at a certain place, it's important to note that without him doing that, you don't get the shifts in the party that we came to see. You know what I mean?
Indeed. I think it's like it's been a theme for me, I guess, even over the last year and a half, but more in private conversations, like the particular nature of the way I'll just say we've been encouraged to only see the negative or the shortcomings in like basically every public Black political or social leader since Martin and Malcolm, like it probably, and including them too, like the negativity that can like frame the discussion of them. Which say like the nature of racism being racism, like making you even go like, like Martin, be kind of like, but Martin could have did this better. It's like, man, they killed that man in public while out advocating for his people and the world to be a better place. I don't know. I mean, all right, I guess he could have he could have went harder, right? He could have went way harder, I suppose. But they also killed him in public, right? Like,
but you know what that is too? That's like the Boondocks. Like, he could have went harder, but what the fuck was your cousin and uncle doing during that time when he was out doing this? Like, was they out kicking ass and taking names?
I was like, I think not. Like, man, were they even, what I mean? Like, they'd be like, well, they was, but the system, held them down. Like, okay, well, they should have did a better job to not get knocked out before we even heard about them. Like, they didn't even make it out the neighborhood with their activism. You know what I mean? Like, anyway. So, like, when it gets to Jesse, and I remember I experienced this when you talk about Jesse Jackson. Like, I was speaking actually at a men's center, halfway house a few years ago. Like somebody there, I forget how that, but basically asked if I would come and do like something during the Black History drawing, and just like talk about stuff, and then talk about, I can't remember what all things I talked about because it was like 7 years ago. But long story short is, after I kind of did like my slides and little presentation about like importance of Black History Month and important studying history, relationship to what was happening in that space in terms of a program that was like halfway house, men returning to the community, and then we, one of the participants brought up like, what do you think about like folks like Jesse who are like race baiters and da, da, da. And it was sort of like I really rejected the person's framing of Jesse and his role, because it was very like, who told you he was like, what do you mean a race baiter? Like what does that mean? But also had to like promote dialogue in that space. So I'm gonna be like, nah, man, you talking some bullshit. So but I framed it. I said, look, I can't control how other people see Jesse Jackson's activism, right? But at the core is whatever misgivings I mean, things that could have been done differently, things maybe been left out of campaigns or work that he was a leader in. And I think at least the overriding theme of my last 10, 15 years, as a community member here, is this tension of age between folks of one generation of like political, social, community leadership and like newer, younger folks, and the sense that maybe older folks aren't getting out the way fast enough for younger folks. Like I've heard that kind of reference to Jesse, or Jesse Jackson, going over negotiating stuff in other countries and other things, and like Jesse Jackson as world diplomat, like folks having misgivings about that. But ultimately, it's like he took the reins to be a public leader around civil rights, fair society, around justice, around political access, economic opportunity. But I don't feel that was as much of Jesse's like big pushes. Like at least I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole history of Operation Breadbasket is interesting. That then shifted in Operation Push, and that's for another time. But yeah, I'm with you.
But just like the idea that like when people step out to be civic leaders, is everybody gonna be happy with their leadership? Yes, their space they're taking, and then if the powers or the resources that could flow towards their work or the work that they lead, there is an opportunity cost. You could say to like, maybe if they weren't as prominent, maybe this other thing would have went a different way. But I don't feel like it's always fair. I guess I would say I don't want to have this moment of a active leader, and the realities of age, right? Like the realities of being an 81-year-old person who was probably took on a lot of mental, physical, and emotional stress being a public figure, getting to the point where it is best for them to not be like the public face and the public lead of work, but also to make sure that we appreciate that, like, yeah, it's hard to be the person that leads these sorts of things. It's hard to run, Rainbow Push Coalition. I know that I was reading one of the articles in the past about like, they were like a local org, and then also had like a more national footprint of like, activating on issues, right? Like all that kind of like actual organizing takes a lot of work. Like it's not something that we should just I don't think people should, I guess, downplay its importance or its value. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I guess, that's maybe my long convoluted way is like, to make sure that we give Jesse some flowers, give him some love, for his dedication and, whatever have you. Now, I'm sure I could find somebody that could, give me like why they don't rock with Jesse, and that's okay. That's okay too. Like it's okay for us to have critique of those who have been active leaders, or public, representatives, of our collective interests. Because that's also, I think, how do we get better? How do we keep working on the things that we're working on if we aren't able to critique and say, hey, I don't really like their position on this. I don't like how that went down, or that's interesting. Maybe not going to want to repeat that particular organizational decision. But I don't think we need to live in a binary world of like they were good or they were bad, and then the bad ones we don't never want to talk about because they were bad. It's like I don't think I don't think that's a winning strategy to building future work. So yeah, that was my first. That was the thing I want to get off my chest.
Yeah. So two things. One, there's a book called "For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics." For all the folks who are listening, you should go get the book. It's a story of 4 Black women who have been involved in politics in their own ways since like either the 70s or late 70s, early 80s. All 4 of the women in the book have had an influence by the 84 Jackson campaign and the resulting. One of the things they talk about in the book, in particular, is this idea that Jesse Jackson talks about: are you a tree shaker or a jelly maker? Right? And, Jesse would say that to people. He would say, I'm a tree shaker. You have to go be a jelly maker, meaning I get the fruit off of the tree through agitation and advocacy. There are other people who then take the fruit and turn it into a thing. And I think it's a really important concept to understand that there are people who don't do everything. Like, let's say we're talking about a line in a in like a factory line. There are some people who put lids on cans. That's what they do. They don't take something from beginning to end. They put lids on cans, and we should honor the fact they put lids on cans because it's actually more effective. And so sometimes there are people who do a particular thing, and we should acknowledge that. We should not want them to do everything well, right? Mm-hmm. There's like kind of like this weird thing. We want people to do everything well and be above reproach and everything, versus if someone is a tree shaker and they're good at it, let them do that if it serves the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. So I think Jesse Jackson and other people have been very good tree shakers. Then there are other people who have come to pass who have become good, quote unquote, jelly makers. And we should acknowledge that. And then 2, I think there's this shift of the civil rights movement to what I would call the Black political movement, which I think gets like left out of the conversation. So there's the civil rights movement, and then there's a time where specifically you start to see the Congressional Black Caucus, who often get left out of these conversations, right? And then you see mayors in local areas. So when you get to 84, you get Jesse Jackson running. You already have mayors all across the country. But you still have a Jesse Jackson or Farrakhan or other parties who, it's important to remember this, other leaders, because we can do this only one focus on Jesse, but thinking there were a lot of other leaders during this time. Mm-hmm. And people were doing that. Then we get to a place through the Black political process, that then elected officials we start to look at as the leaders. So it no longer becomes about the actual advocates. It becomes about the people who have been elected in whatever variety of ways that then we look at as like they are playing a role of leadership. I think it culminates with the election of President Obama, and now goes on to a place. And we've had going back and forth because I think obviously during the murder of George Floyd, you had people who were not elected officials who mattered. And then we're seeing something different occur now, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where you say, okay, well, who speaks for us? And it's like, okay, well, people say, well, your elected officials should speak for us. Or what is this person doing? What is that person doing? Which will tie into our second conversation. So I think we just have to put it in context that there was a time where we looked at leaders who were not elected leaders and been like, what are you doing for us? Where now we have a lot of elected leaders and we can make a judgment on what that looks like. But now people are expecting them to do things because you gave them a vote. Where Jesse, you never voted for him. He just was talking. And to a degree, Reverend Sharpton. It's very similar. Like, you didn't vote for him. He just was talking. But that's also true with reverends and imams. Like, you didn't vote for these people.
Right.
But like, they have a group of people who they represent, and they're talking. So it's just figuring out how you get to this end game, and it doesn't happen through one person, and wanting one person to be almost like figure it all out and be complete and be everything to everyone is unrealistic. And any group of people who have and maintain power, there's a variety of people who are part of that solution making. And to your point, I do want to say it's important, and that the fact that, like Reverend Jackson said, you know what? I'm passing it over. And I'm passing it over because I want people to see that it's important for succession planning. And succession planning doesn't happen on your time, right? Like, sometimes we're kind of in this world of like, we've been listening to hip hop, so there's no country for old men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or old women. So it's kind of like your favorite artist can't be older than 40, right? Because, once you're 40 or 45, you're too damn old, right? So it's like, but that's not how the world works.
Yeah.
So if it does take longer, or if the people are clamoring for leadership, the great thing to go do? Be a leader. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Leaders have followers. You can provide leadership and choose not to have a follower. That's fine. But leaders have people who are listening to them. So if you decide you want to be a leader, it implies by the nature of the word that there are people who are following you.
Yeah.
And if those leaders were as fortunate to have people who are willing to follow what they're saying, then take that into consideration when you critique or look at a new form of leadership, which is fine. But I don't think you have to look around too long to see that some of the newer ideas of leadership have also had their own challenges.
Yeah.
And need to be critiqued, as well as looking at some of the older ones. So, that's my take.
All right. So, I mean, just to close, at least for me, on Jesse, just say, like, I just want to acknowledge, I guess, one, the reality is, those who were leaders and public leaders, in you say like the post-civil rights age from, 70s, 80s, 90s, they're getting up there, and, in age and time where, Vernon Jarrett, we spoke on, I guess, almost a year and a half, 2 years when he passed. Others, Vernon Jordan, pardon me, not Vernon Jarrett. We've spoken on some others, and we'll probably speak on some others in the future. But I think it's important, to just take a moment and give Jesse some props, thank him for his service as leader. I'm sure, he still be present, in spaces, and, it'll be something will happen in the public world, and it'll be like something, a message from the Reverend Jesse Jackson on this issue, I'm sure will happen. But I just think it's important to give some props and some acknowledgement. There's a lot of people who have not put as much part of their life centered on, some level of community service voice. And I think it's important to say, good looking out. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate you, man.
No, and I want to say I think that's important, because the practicing of gratitude for service, I think we take service for granted in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes because we think people got paid for it or people got famous for it, that we should take service. But you and I both know, and those who are listening, if you're listening to this, it's likely you understand this point. Service is taxing. Mm-hmm. Service has its impact on you personally. Service has its impact on your community, on your family. Service has impact on everything. So I think the idea of practicing the gratitude and not always trying to do a record of like, was this good or bad? But it was what it was. What did you take from it and what did you move? It makes it whatever it is. And then we can figure it out from there. But to stand in gratitude is important. So thanks, Jess.
So, in other news,
another crazy shit.
And why we need to make sure we acknowledge folks like Jesse Jackson in the ongoing cycle or saga of what I don't even know what to call it, but foolishness of like, man, let's see how much we can play in your face before you'll snap on us. And I want to be well, this ain't depressing. I'm not, you can just put a big allegedly on it. Anything I say in this form, if in case somebody like, well, you said something wasn't true about thing. Basically, the state of Florida released or preparing to release these updated their state educational standards around teaching Black history, which included at least one that. And to me, it's just the absurdity that you would even have these two words in the same sentence talking about slavery. Like, you can't have slavery and then talk about that there may have been some personal benefit. You just can't. Okay? You just can't do it, Florida. Can't do it anybody. Anybody's like, well, I mean, it could have. Like, you just can't. Besides the fact that the idea, and I maybe I don't know if I should find it. I was like, I don't want to help their Q scores or something by me making sure I found I should find it just because it's maybe there'll be one person out there that'll be like, you didn't look what they really said. You just going on conjecture. You just running your mouth. That sort of thing. But the essential issue, it's just like folk we operate. We've talked about in our conversations how many folks operate in a fully ahistorical manner as it pertains to just about everything. Right. And I understand like every aspect of the human experience does not need to be like rooted in some historical analysis. Throwing
this is me, y'all, kinda, but
like, yeah.
Kinda.
Like it do, but like, well, I'm saying like if you tell me you like peanut butter and jelly, but every once in a while you might eat a Crustable, which is the most sugariest, sweetest. Like if you ever worked around an after school program and they got them Crustables and you hungry, man, a little Crustable come through in the clutch. It is not, like for like we could get into a debate about like if you should be eating those, if you could just make them, you know what I'm saying? Anyway.
I'm with you. Liz, I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm saying, so that's all I'm saying. But the point being, because if we don't, one, I'm not surprised when people don't know like certain like clear facts about the past, right? But I am totally almost astounded sometimes when people will assume shit that's totally ridiculous about the past, or like don't know, but still feel like stridently comfortable moving forward with what they think they know. So to be like, well, yeah, because they didn't know how to do anything. They were just what, like traditional hunter-gatherer farming and farming economies and metallurgy and nomadic herdsmen and salt traders and like, the folks whom and the data's out there for those that don't know that, as much as there was, direct trade and trade of prisoners of war, there was actually a very high rate of, if you could, sneaking up on some people who didn't know the army was coming and killing and kidnapping them and taking them on a boat and leaving those lands once, as those apparatus became sophisticated enough to do so. And the intentional going and getting folks who knew how to farm rice, because West Africa being one of the two centers of the world where like people farmed rice, for centuries. And so like the rice that was the primary product of, South Carolina, of the Carolina colonies, Georgia, other stuff, as they intentionally went to get West Africans who could do that already. Like
AKA when you talk about the Gijis and somebody black in your family that you talk about to eat everything with rice. It is a historical and economic reason that you say that. Now, the fact they got a gold tooth is different. But the fact that the fact of why you talk about that is not. I mean, I added some levity to Justice's statement, but in all reality, like no, and it only takes to your point, God. It only takes a cursory glance to research this stuff. Like, the old man, urban bard now being facetious, but Sean Carter said, "Google's your friend, bro." Like, like you could check this stuff out of, like you said, who went and got who, why, right? And again, as you and I have both talked about on here, the relationship to the indigenous people of this land was also much more complicated than we give it credit for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hence, when I will go on my yearly issue about Thanksgiving and, whatever, I'll leave that to then and everybody can be angry at me then. I won't spoil it in July. I won't spoil it in July for when you're mad at me in August. I mean, mad at me in November talking about but it's about time we come together. But the idea that this stuff can be ahistorical, and it's because it's how you see it or how you think about it, or what lends itself to how you feel about it, right? So there is a derivation of sorts in my mind of like, yes, can people have alternative views on things based on looking at the history? That's fine, right? And it can be played out with, historical context. Then this is how I kind of like look at it, which is different because it's not about are you looking at the history as what it is, right? Mm-hmm. And then that goes into how I feel about it. And I think we're at a place in this country, in this world, kind of, we're on some like, what is how I feel about it, which is how you get a set of people who actually tell you that people benefited from being taken as prisoners of war or being sold, because this is not one of them places. We're not we're not ahistorical. Mm-hmm. But also it's important to remember that there was a place where people were sold by other people. However, it is also not debatable that American chattel slavery was unique in its ability to try to create an economic engine. And what it had to foster and what it had to do as a kind of process was unique until that time in economic history, in political and social history. And so I'm saying that to say that, like, the idea that you frame it and say, well, no, even though the history is all in and Google's your friend, people did okay with it, so why should we debate it? The idea of it, and for it to happen in a state like Florida, which again has these political overtones from who I'm going to frame Ron DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, is a Christian nationalist warrior, or at least he's running as one. Mm-hmm. He is running as something actually very, very different than we've ever seen. There is a tendency to compare him to Trump. But in actuality, if you compare the Trump that ran in 2016 to the DeSantis running now, they are entirely different. It's pretty deep to say that DeSantis is actually running to Trump's right.
Yes, though.
Right? Like, how can you actually say with all the crazy shit that Donald Trump has said, because he doesn't believe any of it anyway. Like, I think it's important for us to recognize this. Donald Trump doesn't believe any of the shit he ever has said. Yeah. Donald Trump wants power. And whatever he had to say to keep power, he would do. That's not saying that's okay. It's just saying it's reality of it. But when you get someone like DeSantis that's actually running, Trump is like, oh man, I wouldn't say no shit like that. That ain't cool.
That's wild. Oh man, you heard what he said?
You got to go pretty goddamn far to actually be
there. And it's like, it's like, I've read a couple articles where like some people like, yeah, but like that we're on the panel, kind of like, yeah, y'all really, really shouldn't do this. Like, you really shouldn't put this in there in any way. Like, but it's the, in our modern age, like I said, like almost like, it's like your man's that went on the House floor or whatever, or in the committee meeting. I couldn't for sure which one it was, and said like colored persons. Like, you know what you're doing, dog. Like, why are you playing in my face, man? Because nobody say that, man. Like, don't no white person refer to a black person as colored, unless they had unless one they're like wow old and somebody happened to come get them out they take them to the care home or
out of a tomb.
Like they've been in the cut for a really long time, and they're like, and the colored girl came in here and helped me with my feet today, right? Like, and you'd be like, oh man, Mr. Johnson, we don't really say colored no more. Like, that ain't cool. Like I know you're 97, like I know you're 112. Like you may not have heard about like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm not supposed to say colored. Pardon me, but she took it. They really helped me today, right? Like, and that's being very positive. Okay, I'm being very positive and giving Mr. fictional character a benefit.
You sound like you sound like Eddie Murphy when you're saying this. I gotta tell you,
right? So, like the idea that you would like you're doing this, like the tactical question I start to ask, I'm like, are there that many of these folks that want to vote this way that when they hear you throw that they blow that whistle, that they're like, yeah, I can't wait to vote for you because I've been thinking this. Like, are there really that many of them? Or is it sort of like, are you also sort of going like, how far can I pull, conservative folks over towards me? Right? Can I get away with this? I really am curious. Like, is the rationale like, yo, let's do it. Let's just see let's just say it. What they gonna do? They gonna vote for the Democrat? Right? Like, they gonna vote for us or him. They only got two people. Right.
So I agree. And this is part two of my point about this. Not only are you outrighting, are you to Trump's right? Representative Donalds and other black folks in the Republican Party who, whatever you think about where they stand, I just always like to submit there's always been a strand of black republicanism that obviously the Republican Party has moved. So the J.C. Watts in the 90s and, the brother that be on MSNBC that used to work for Marion Barry, like, they were Republicans, but clearly different Republicans than some of the Republicans today. But even when you get Tim Scott, obviously he has a dog in the fight. But even Representative Donalds, from Florida, pretty conservative, right? Like, you'd argue with him at the cookout.
Absolutely.
It would get haywire. It would get, it get a little tense at the end of the night over with Hennessy and Crown Royal. Him talking about people not going to get jobs and not having to get up and go. When there's like, yo, dog, slavery is the country's original sin, dog. Like, when they rebuke you, like, dog, I live in your state and you're too far out. Like, you're tripping, right? It's so much to be said that you teach this, but also I want to share this. This is where the role of independent education in communities. And I'm using this as a broader context of knowledge of self here, right? We have some specific elements that we deal with as we share our, the two people talking, freaking frack, right?
Indeed.
But the broader context and sense of knowledge of self in independent education in communities, this is why it's so important. And this is why when we're having the dialogue around education, it ain't just whatever you would say, reading, writing, sense of skills, understanding the world. There's also stuff that frankly, going back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, go back to actually the 1800s. Black folks was like, yeah, you know what? We have to tell our own community a set of things about ourselves so that we never make sure that y'all don't tell us something about ourselves that isn't true.
All right.
That's why whether you're talking about an actual school, whether you're talking about a community center, whether you're talking about brothers and sisters on the corners, whether we're talking about, television programming or audio programming or plays, that's why a sense of self-education in our communities is actually more important than ever. Because, it's easy to say, I'm not going to Florida, right? Like, because that's, I think, people's first thing. I'm not going to Florida. I want to share something that people may or may not know. There's a lot of Black folks in Florida.
Right.
And the idea of you not going to Florida because Ron DeSantis is a Christian nationalist warrior, the question to ask yourself is, who are you putting out of a job when you don't go to that hotel you went to go hang out at the Fountain Blue, even though you didn't stay there?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because y'all know y'all go to them hotels, y'all don't stay at the Fountain Blue, but y'all go hang out there like y'all stayed there.
Yeah, you
go leave it,
play the lobby. Bars.
In the lobby. Who do you harm? And so are you waiting for all the rest of the are you waiting for all the rest of the white nationalists to go hang out in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and Tampa to make sure that Black folks have a job? Or are we going to make sure that we're empowering people in those places along with the fight and advocacy to get this fought, to get this pushed back, to make sure that people get what they need? So, we can think about multiple solutions to issues and we can be offended by the issue, but we also have to think about how are we standing up, buttresses to make sure that people are well, even if someone's taught that someone benefited from slavery. And I'm not leaving out my white brothers and sisters who could ostensibly go to the school being taught that slavery was okay. But guess what? There are white people being taught that slavery was not all bad right now anyway.
Oh, yeah. Every day. I'm always amazed when you got to kind of go like, well, like slavery. I'm like, you just kind of yada over like rapacious violence and forced servitude. Like it wasn't like, oh, yeah, nice slave. Sometimes you just couldn't go outside when you wanted to. Like, nah, man, like it was open wanton brutality, right? And it's I think it's one, I guess it's one like, will this moment like hold? Meaning will folks keeping this kind of conversation alive? I mean, because it's become this like abstract thing, like it's not abstract to those who actually involved in education. Because you're like, well, actually, that's how the standards that are there in your state, then dictate, what can be how your educators are supposed to structure curriculum and lessons around, meeting those standards. That's like how we're supposed to objectively measure if the kids are learning what they're learning, right? But I think for most people, you didn't know that there were standards when you were in school. So therefore, this is sort of like, oh wait, there was like a playbook. There was like stuff we were supposed to know. Like that was someone spent time on that. Like, yeah, that's how curriculums work. And just the idea of seeing all this play out and like, will especially the prominent, Black conservatives, elected officials, say, hey, say to their party, like, hey, man, y'all can't be like, this ain't cool, like, because it's almost one of those like folks outside of their political or in organizing sphere, they're going to discredit and devalue their perspective on this, at any moment. But I would think at least the people that you say you're in your wheelhouse, y'all would go, hey, maybe we should maybe we shouldn't be really trying to push these ideas. This is I don't know if that's. I'm just curious if it will hold. Will this still be something that will stay alive, into next spring, as or early start of the year when the first primaries and stuff really start going, like and if between this and what's the other if your man gets more indictments, will any of that actually, I mean, this is a fascinating study in the American democratic reality, democracy, meaning like not like Democratic Party, but like democracy, like democratic reality of the United States as a country, civics wise, like all sorts of wild tests for what democracy means are going to happen over the next year with so it's someone who might be about to get convicted, like it doesn't expressly say you can't be president while in prison. I mean, practically, obviously you can't, but I don't know, like,
or even just multiple times of being like indicted.
Right. Like at some point it has to be like, we can't be doing this, right? We're not doing this, right? Like I would just think if you were a supporter, at some point you go like, I mean, they can't all be lying.
Right. Or you start to think like, even if you say that there's a system that wants to, harm people, you still look and say, okay, well, after 2 or 3, 4 or 5 times, like, wait, but was he there? Like, did someone hide something? Like, is that worth a conversation? Like,
look.
Is it worth a look to say maybe somebody hid something and like, yo, they just keep indicting him? Like, but the fact that the person that keeps getting indicted is actually to the left of the person who's trying to say slavery benefited people.
Like they could have got some skills. Yeah, I'm saying, might have picked some pointers up.
Like, yo, that is so wild. Like the idea of this, man. Like, oh man.
So
yeah, man. Like, it's very similar to the whole thing around like, the idea that, because I read something the other day that made a good point. The Supreme Court didn't end affirmative action. The Supreme Court said affirmative action could not be used in making a decision around college admissions by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Supreme Court did not get rid of that across the land.
Yeah.
People may decide to respond to it like that, but that's actually not what it said.
Yeah.
It said race-based admissions on only race alone is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have jumped so far that we're just like, oh no, you just got rid of everything. No, you didn't get rid of everything. You got rid of that. And it's making, to the degree that people think this is important, it's making folks now look at legacy. Because if you couldn't use strictly race, can you use legacy? And some like colleges are preemptively getting rid of it because they know that the moment that you got rid of race as a use, getting rid of legacy will sooner come anyway, which I think is going to have profound influences on colleges, universities in America.
Yeah. And I think it's and I guess I would say this is my kind of closing thought, like on this, like, on the broader side of all this is will folks, will more people take up the like I said, like understanding how all this stuff works, and then realizing like some of these things, the way a small group of small representative body of people can lay something out that will shape the perception of the great masses of people. Can leave I guess I'll say it faster. We need people to be involved in these things and to pay attention, and then also understand, like, it's okay to question folks like intent and go like, this really seems like you are trying to be intentionally destructive, and further, this is like objectively just not true. And therefore we shouldn't put that in standards that we're going to use to educate the children. And then boiling down to, when you look at things like, because then that feeds into sort of the perception of what is the impact of a racially oppressive society, and in the different ways and stages that it has been racially repressive. And on that axis, not into the exclusion of other axis of oppression and control. And then to go, what is the case for then people who are connected to that experience being a part of the places that we frame, at least, as the sources of the best and the brightest of the brightest, who we're going to give status and credit and a leg up in consideration for all types of public and private leadership roles in our society. And if we're going to do that, we can't just act like we just can't be that foolish, is how I see it. We can't be so foolish as to go like, oh, it doesn't matter what their race is. It's like, no, it actually does. And there's a lot of different ways, if we had more time, and I felt it was an appropriate public conversation to have around like, what are the risks to a society if you constantly keep, some people out, like where we're going. So, hopefully, just for everybody, just, please pay attention. And if you've never read your state, if your state does full state standards, because I don't think all states don't necessarily. Although
no, all states don't know
something.
Especially, frankly, a lot of them. The further you get west, not as in California and Oregon, but the further you get in the middle, gets a little iffy on state standards.
Yeah. they
homesteaders and Sooners and shit.
Yeah, they have like or the state standards are more vague, and then the county or your district or your educational service district, or there's a lot of ways that stuff happens. But wherever you live, go look up your standards and see what they say. Because maybe about 10 years ago now, when the comic people were all up in arms about Common Core, and now most people have no idea what the standards are in their community. But people was out throwing rocks and stones at Common Core, in the mid 2010s or whatever. And this is not an endorsement or up or down on Common Core. I'm just saying, I remember when people was all mad about it, and now nobody remembers. So, things move quickly, and this can get quickly brushed under the rug. So that's my last thought. Anything you got to say?
Stakes is high, but just want to tell y'all, maybe not the next one, but we're going to have a conversation about this hip hop at 50 shit.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we have to have this conversation. It's going to be a wang dang doodle when we have it. So if you want to connect what I was saying at the beginning to the end of this conversation, that's it.
Indeed. Absolutely. So with that, I say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, I'm Majestic. You can support the podcast by listening, sharing, and liking and subscribing wherever it is that you listen. I will save you all the other things I regularly say at this point, because you know what to do if you listen. If not, please stay tuned, and thank you for joining us for these conversations. It's much appreciated. So with that, I'm going to not belabor the point and let you go. Peace.